At 17, I came home shaking, bruised, and broken. I thought my mother would hold me. I thought my father would say, "It's not your fault." But instead, she sneered, "Well, look at what you were wearing." And he muttered coldly, "Keep quiet. We don't want the neighbors talking." In that moment, I didn't just lose my sense of safety. I lost my parents too. They didn't protect me. They blamed me. And years later, when I stood in court, I finally made them listen. Have you ever been betrayed by the very people who should have protected you? If this story strikes a nerve, if you've ever faced silence when you needed support, leave a comment, like this video, and hit subscribe. Because sometimes telling the truth is the revenge. My name is Tessa Monroe, and when I was 17, I stopped believing in parents. I grew up in a small, conservative town in upstate New York, the kind of place where everybody knows everybody, and reputation matters more than reality. My father, Gregory, was a deacon at the local church, upright, respectable, a man whose voice could quiet a room. My mother, Sharon, was the perfect pastor's wife, always smiling, always obedient, always cold. On the outside, our family looked like a Norman Rockwell painting. On the inside, it was more like a frozen war zone. We didn't talk about feelings, we didn't talk about boundaries, and we definitely didn't talk about shame. From a young age, I was taught one thing: be quiet, don't make noise, don't draw attention. I tried my best to be the good daughter, honor student, church choir, no dates, no parties. I followed every rule. But one rainy afternoon in October, my world shattered. I had stayed late at school for debate practice. I missed the bus. My phone was dead. I decided to walk home, just 20 minutes. I never made it past the alley behind the drugstore. A man, older, fast, stronger, grabbed me, pushed me against the wall. I don't remember all the details. My brain protects me from some of it. But I remember the pain, the smell of wet concrete, and his voice saying, "Don't scream. No one's gonna believe you." I stumbled home in torn clothes and trembling legs, hoping for safety, hoping for love. Instead, my mother took one look at me and said, "Well, what were you wearing?" I stuttered, trying to explain. She cut me off. "Why didn't you scream? Why didn't you fight harder?" Then my father came in, scanned me once, and said flatly, "Clean yourself up. We're not calling the police." I begged them. I cried. But he shut it all down with one sentence: "This didn't happen. Not in this family." They weren't worried about me. They were worried about how it would look. For weeks, I barely left my room. No one asked why. No one offered comfort. At church, my parents still smiled, still shook hands. And I just sat there, numb and shrinking, watching them play the perfect family act. That winter, something hardened inside me. They weren't going to protect me, so I would protect myself, and others like me. I threw myself into school, got accepted into Columbia University with a full scholarship, majored in criminal justice, then law school. I wanted to understand how predators walk free. I wanted to stop them, and most of all, I wanted to be the voice for girls whose parents told them to stay silent. By the time I was 29, I was working as an assistant district attorney in Manhattan, young, ambitious, and deeply respected. I'd built a reputation for taking on tough cases, especially those involving abuse and assault. People said I was relentless. What they didn't know was that I wasn't just fighting for my clients. I was fighting for 17-year-old me, the girl who had no one. But fate has a twisted sense of irony. One morning, a new case file landed on my desk. A high-profile sexual assault case involving a man from my hometown. Someone I knew. Someone my parents knew. At first, I froze. Could I be impartial? Could I go back there? Then I saw the victim's statement. She was 16. She'd told her parents, and they had told her to shut up. That was all I needed to know. This time, the silence would not win. This time, they would be the ones forced to listen. Driving back into that town felt like swallowing glass. It had been over a decade since I left, and yet the streets hadn't changed. The same cracked sidewalks, The same gossiping old ladies outside the church, the same suffocating silence wrapped in Sunday smiles. The case I'd been assigned had rattled the entire county. The accused was Henry Dalton, a real estate tycoon, town donor, and one of my father's oldest golf buddies. The victim was a 16-year-old girl named Ava. Ava had confided in her parents, and just like mine, they had called her a liar. Her story echoed mine in terrifying detail. Same dismissals, same silencing, same toxic parents trying to protect everything but their child. I met Ava the day after I arrived. She was quiet, but her eyes were fierce. She told me she was scared to come forward, her school counselor had said, because she saw what happened to you all those years ago. I froze. She knew. The town knew. They'd always known. And they'd let it die, because I hadn't screamed loud enough. That night, I sat in the hotel room I'd rented, the courthouse in view, and for the first time in years, I cried. Not because I was afraid, because I was angry. Why did we teach girls to feel shame for surviving? Why did we raise them in homes that chose image over justice? And most of all, why did our own parents become accomplices in our pain? I stared into the mirror, mascara smudged, jaw clenched, and something in me cracked wide open. I wasn't going to prosecute just another predator. I was going to destroy the system and the silence that let him exist. The next morning, I showed up in court. My heels echoed sharply across the tiled floor. Reporters whispered. Old classmates pretended not to recognize me. But the worst part? My parents were sitting in the gallery, together, upright, proud, pretending to be concerned citizens. Our eyes locked. My mother's lips pressed into that tight, judgmental line I'd known all my life. My father didn't blink. Neither of them smiled. They knew why I was here, and they hated it. During jury selection, Henry's lawyers tried to paint Ava as confused. I shredded them. When they tried to drag her past into the conversation, I objected with fire in my voice. Every word I spoke in court, every objection, every question, wasn't just for Ava. It was for me. It was for every girl whose toxic parents taught her that keeping quiet was more important than healing. And still, the real breaking point hadn't come yet. It was 3 days into the trial when the defense called a surprise character witness, Gregory Monroe, my father. I felt my stomach drop. He walked up to the stand, Bible in hand, wedding ring gleaming, swore to tell the truth. And then he began the performance of a lifetime. He talked about what a good man Henry was. He called the accusations out of character. He looked the jury in the eye and said, "Henry's the kind of man I'd trust with my own daughter." I stood up. "Your Honor, may I cross-examine?" "Proceed, Ms. Monroe." The courtroom fell still. I walked slowly to the witness stand. My father's eyes flickered just for a second. He hadn't expected this part. "Mr. Monroe," I said, voice steady, "have you always believed your friend Henry was trustworthy?" "Yes." "Even after learning about the allegations against him?" "They're just allegations." "Right. And when your own daughter was assaulted at 17, did you also refer to it as just allegations?" The courtroom gasped. My mother shifted in her seat. My father's face turned pale. "I'm sorry," he said. "You heard me. When I came home bruised, crying, unable to speak. What did you say to me, Dad? Do you remember?" He remained silent. "I remember. You said, 'Don't make a fuss. The neighbors will talk.'" I turned to the jury. "That's what toxic parents do. They don't protect. They bury the truth. They protect each other, their status, their friendships. And girls like Ava get sacrificed." I looked back at him. "You stood there while I bled, and now you're standing for him? That's who you are." The judge struck the gavel, calling for order. The defense objected, shouting about bias. But it didn't matter. The damage was done. The courtroom had heard the truth. Loud, clear, public. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't the one who had to feel ashamed. That night, I walked out of the courthouse and found Ava waiting on the steps. She didn't say anything at first. Then she whispered, "Thank you." I looked at her and nodded, because she had no idea. She'd just saved me too. The courtroom drama had sent shockwaves through the town. Newspapers ran headlines like "DA confronts her own father on the stand." Church whispers turned venomous, and for the first time, people stopped pretending. But as much as that moment had felt like victory, I knew it wasn't the end. My father had lied under oath, and no one blinked. My mother had sat there, stone-faced, watching me unravel a truth she'd spent years burying. And the town? They wanted it all to go away. Quietly, neatly, just like they'd done with me. But I wasn't that girl anymore. And this time, I wasn't just going to fight. I was going to burn the whole toxic system to the ground. The day after the cross-examination, I went back to my hotel and opened my old storage box, the one I'd kept sealed for years. Inside were pieces of the girl I used to be. A ripped debate team photo, my blood-stained hoodie from that night, a diary no one ever read, and taped to the last page was the name. Jeremy Lowell, the man who had assaulted me at 17. I had buried his name for years, never pressed charges, never told a soul outside of one therapist in college. Why? Because I had no witnesses, no support, and toxic parents who made it clear I'd ruin everything if I spoke. But now I was a damn prosecutor, with access, with power, and with nothing left to lose. I called Detective Melissa Grant, one of the few cops I trusted in the city. "I need you to help me quietly reopen an old assault file. No formal complaint yet, just research." "Yours?" she asked gently. I didn't answer. I didn't have to. Within a day, she tracked down Lowell's current address. He hadn't left the state. In fact, he lived just 2 towns over, with a wife and 2 daughters. I stared at the photo of him walking into a PTA meeting, smiling, confident, like nothing had ever happened. My hands shook, but not from fear. It was fury. Because men like him didn't just survive. They thrived while girls like me were left to sew ourselves back together in the dark. I added his name to the file. I'd gather more, build a case, slowly, legally, smart. But I wouldn't stop there. No, this wasn't just about one predator. It was about the culture that protected him. The one my parents preached. The one that valued status over truth, reputation over safety. That meant going after the root, even if it meant going after them. I reached out to a local journalist named Dana Ruiz. She'd grown up in the same town, but had since made a name for herself exposing cover-ups in small communities. We met in a coffee shop 2 towns over. "You sure you're ready for this?" she asked after I laid it all out. "Ready?" I said. "I've been waiting for this for 15 years. Dana started digging. She found 3 other girls from the church who'd had similar experiences. One of them had even gone to my father for help. He'd told her to pray about it and forgive. I brought their stories into the case file, names sealed, identities protected. But the pattern? Unmistakable. And then came the final straw. My mother sent me an email. No greeting, no warmth. Just one sentence. "You've embarrassed us enough. Let it go." Let it go. That's what toxic parents always say, isn't it? Let it go. Don't dig it up. Don't make us look bad. But they never stop to ask if we're okay, if we've healed, if we ever could. I replied with a scanned copy of the affidavit I'd just signed, the one officially reopening the investigation into Jeremy Lowell, and I CC'd the church board. I wasn't doing this for revenge alone. I was doing it for Ava, for every girl forced into silence, for the teenager inside me who thought she'd never matter again. The town might have survived my testimony, but it wouldn't survive the truth. And I was just getting started. The story broke on a Wednesday morning. Daughter of church leader reopens assault case tied to local power players. The article went viral across 3 counties in less than 24 hours. Dana Ruiz had done her job, and done it well. She hadn't used names of victims, but she didn't have to. The message was loud, clear, and devastating. There had been a culture of silence, and someone was finally breaking it. I watched the media frenzy unfold from my office window. My phone lit up every few minutes. Text messages, missed calls, emails with subject lines like urgent, call me. And then came the inevitable, the one call I knew would come. My mother. She didn't even wait for me to speak. "What the hell are you doing, Tessa? Do you understand what you've done to our name?" I let the silence stretch. She continued, voice tight and trembling. "You've dragged this family through the mud. Your father can't even walk into church. People are asking questions." "Good," I cut in coldly. "Maybe it's time they did." There was a pause on her end, just long enough for me to picture her standing in our old kitchen, gripping the cordless phone like it was the only weapon she had left. "You're blowing this out of proportion," she hissed. "You're angry. I understand, but you've made your point. Now stop before you ruin everything." I closed my eyes and took a breath. "You still don't get it." "What don't I get?" "That I'm not doing this to ruin everything," I said, voice sharp now. "I'm doing it because everything was already ruined, and no one said a damn word." I hung up, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel guilt. I felt power. That week, 3 more women came forward. 2 of them were minors when the abuse happened. One had written letters to the church board, letters that mysteriously disappeared. Dana verified them. I folded them into my case file. In the town? It went from denial to panic. The church called a crisis meeting. My father was suspended from his duties pending further review. The man who used to lecture about morality every Sunday was now hiding in his own house, refusing to take media calls. I knew it was working. The truth was like a fire. It didn't just burn the guilty. It exposed the entire foundation. And toxic parents? They don't know how to survive when the mask slips. Then came the final confrontation, and I didn't expect it to happen so soon. I was walking into court one morning when I saw him, my father, waiting by the steps. No cameras, no crowd. Just him, looking smaller than I'd ever seen. "Tessa," he called out. I stopped. He walked up slowly, eyes bloodshot, jaw clenched. "You're making a mistake," he said. "No," I replied. "I made a mistake 15 years ago. I trusted you." His face tightened. "You don't understand what this is doing to your mother." "My mother told me to let it go. She covered for you, for your friends, and now she's upset that people finally know the truth? This isn't how you fix things." I stepped forward, voice low and sharp. "I'm not trying to fix you. I'm trying to fix what you destroyed." He stared at me, and for the first time, I saw something that almost looked like fear. But I didn't let it move me. I walked past him, up the courthouse steps, and into a courtroom that now belonged to me. Did you feel that moment of justice? When the daughter silenced by her own parents finally made them tremble? That's what happens when truth is louder than shame. If you've ever dreamed of standing up to toxic parents, this story is for you. Like, comment, and subscribe, because the fire's not done yet. The night before the final hearing, I couldn't sleep. The case against Jeremy Lowell was solid now, tighter than I ever thought it could be. Multiple witnesses, corroborating stories, a damning pattern of behavior stretching back more than a decade. But what kept me awake wasn't him. It was them. My parents. The toxic parents who had turned a crime into an inconvenience. The people who had taught me that silence was safer than truth. The ones who were now about to watch everything they built collapse, not because of a stranger, but because of me. I spent the early morning reviewing my closing argument. I knew the evidence. I knew the law. But this case wasn't just about statutes and timelines. It was about truth. It was about shame. And it was about every single adult who chose their own comfort over a child's pain. When I walked into the courthouse that morning, the atmosphere was electric. The courtroom was packed. Local reporters, national journalists, people from my high school who hadn't spoken my name in 10 years. All of them were there, and so were my parents. Front row, as if they had any right to witness this. My mother wore navy blue, her favorite color when trying to appear composed. My father didn't look like himself. Gone was the proud deacon. He looked like a man unraveling, trying to hold together the edges of a story that no longer made sense. He wouldn't meet my eyes, but I saw the flicker in his hands, that barely contained tremble that said he knew. He knew the moment had come. Jeremy's defense team was desperate now. They tried everything: procedural delays, attacks on witness credibility, even subtle digs at me for being emotionally invested. And I was. God help me. I was more invested than I'd ever been in anything. Because this wasn't just a trial. It was a reckoning. The judge allowed the final motion, a full review of Jeremy's community connections. That meant my father's letters of character reference, the ones he'd written to help Jeremy get out of a previous harassment complaint, would be made public. And that was the turning point. When the prosecutor read the statement aloud in court, my father's signature at the bottom, you could feel the shift in the room, not just in the jury, but in the public. The man who had always preached purity and responsibility had knowingly defended a predator. My mother finally looked at me. Her eyes weren't cold this time. They were wide, dazed, maybe even afraid, because for the first time they weren't just watching me tell the truth. They were watching everyone else believe it. Tomorrow, I would deliver my final argument. Tomorrow, a jury would decide the fate of the man who had broken me. But tonight, I stood on the edge of everything I had feared and realized I wasn't afraid anymore. The courtroom was silent. 12 jurors sat stone-faced, waiting. Reporters hovered at the edges of their seats, pens poised. And at the prosecution's table, I rose. The judge gave a slight nod. "Ms. Monroe, you may proceed." I stepped forward, the closing argument gripped tightly in my hand, not because I needed the paper, but because I needed to feel how steady I'd become. I looked straight at the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began, voice clear and calm, "this isn't just a case about one man's violence. It's about a system, a culture, that allowed him to keep going." I walked toward the center of the room. Jeremy Lowell didn't act in a vacuum. He was protected, praised, repeatedly forgiven by a town that refused to listen to its daughters. And why? Because speaking up would have been messy, because silence was easier than truth. I turned slowly, letting my eyes land on every face in that jury box. But silence isn't neutral. It's not harmless. It's not polite. Silence is what predators depend on. I paused long enough for the words to sting. Jeremy assaulted at least 4 young women, and he was helped by friends, helped by his community, helped by letters from respected figures, like Gregory Monroe. Gasps echoed. All eyes turned toward my father in the front row. He didn't flinch, but his hands were shaking. I continued. Gregory Monroe, a church leader, a father, wrote in defense of a man accused of assault. Not once, but twice. Even when the stories were known. Even when the victims were his own daughter's age. I looked at him directly now. And when his daughter came home bruised and crying, he told her to keep quiet, because the neighbors might talk. My voice cracked slightly, not with weakness, but with fire. He didn't protect her. He protected himself, because that's what toxic parents do. I let that sentence hang in the air like a verdict. They don't ask if you're safe. They ask if you're making them look bad. They don't comfort. They control. And then they call it love. I stepped back. I'm not asking you to just convict Jeremy Lowell. I'm asking you to send a message. To every girl who's ever been silenced. To every parent who chose denial over defense. To every community that thinks covering up evil is better than confronting it. I placed my closing statement on the podium and finished with a whisper that hit like thunder. Let today be the day silence loses. I turned and walked back to my seat. Behind me, I didn't need to look to know. My father had dropped his gaze. My mother was crying, and the entire courtroom was finally listening. For the first time, they had to. The verdict came just before noon. 12 jurors filed in, quiet and unreadable. The judge asked the foreperson to stand. I gripped the edge of the table, my breath held, my entire body still. On the charge of felony sexual assault, we find the defendant guilty. There it was, 2 syllables that collapsed years of silence, shame, and buried rage. Guilty. Jeremy didn't react. No outburst, no apology. Just a quiet, stunned disbelief, like the system he trusted had suddenly turned on him. But I wasn't looking at him. I was looking at them. My father's face was pale, drawn, hollowed out by the weight of exposure. My mother sat beside him, no longer composed. Just undone. And for the first time in my life, I didn't want anything from them. Not approval, not apology. I was done begging toxic parents to become something they were never capable of being. After the courtroom cleared, I stepped outside. Reporters swarmed, microphones outstretched, shouting my name. I ignored them. I needed quiet. But then I saw her. Ava. She stood at the bottom of the courthouse steps, clutching her mother's hand. And this time, her mother was holding on tightly, present, protective. Ava walked up to me. She didn't say much. She didn't need to. She simply said, "Thank you for not giving up." I nodded. "You helped me remember why I started." That moment was everything. 2 days later, my parents asked to meet. I agreed, not out of hope, but out of closure. We met at a quiet cafe outside of town. No cameras, no masks. They were the first to speak. "You've destroyed everything," my mother whispered. "No," I said evenly. "I revealed it. There's a difference." My father leaned forward, his voice shaky. "You humiliated us. The community. They've turned on us." "I didn't make you write those letters, Dad. I didn't make you ignore me or protect him. You did that. And now you're facing the cost." He said nothing. I stood up calmly. "This is the last time we speak. I'm not doing the dance anymore. No more pretending we're a family. I have a life to live, a real one, without lies, without guilt, without you." My mother's lips quivered. "You'll regret this." I met her eyes, steady. "No, what I regret is spending so many years thinking I needed your love to be whole." And with that, I walked away. Not out of anger, but out of peace. I wasn't theirs anymore, and I never would be again. 6 months later, I stood on a stage in front of 200 high school students. Behind me, a screen displayed one word in bold: truth. I'd been invited to speak at a youth empowerment conference, not as a prosecutor, but as a survivor, as someone who had lived through betrayal, fought for justice, and made it out whole. Sort of. Because healing, I'd learned, wasn't a finish line. It was a choice. A daily one. And some days it came easy. Others, I had to fight for it. After the trial, I moved out of the city. I didn't run. I chose stillness. Found a place by the water, somewhere quiet, somewhere that didn't carry the weight of what had been done to me. I started journaling again. I took long walks without headphones, and slowly I stopped waking up with my jaw clenched. I kept a photo on my desk, not of my parents, not of the trial. It was Ava, the day after the verdict, holding her signed victim statement with quiet pride. To me, that photo was everything I had fought for. Because revenge, I learned, doesn't always look like rage. Sometimes the most radical revenge against toxic parents is simply becoming everything they said you'd never be, loving yourself, living loud, and never again asking for permission to exist. I never heard from my parents again, but I did hear from others. Letters, emails, quiet messages from women I'd never met. "You made me feel seen. I thought I was the only one. Thank you for saying what I couldn't." Each message was another stitch in the wound, another thread pulling me back together. Because that's the thing about surviving toxic families. They try to isolate you, convince you that you're the problem, that you are broken. But we're not. We're just the ones brave enough to name the poison out loud. As I finished my speech, I looked out at the sea of young faces. Some were tearful. Others nodded in silent recognition. And I knew at least one of them needed to hear what I had just said. So I ended with this. If your pain makes others uncomfortable, don't shrink to protect them. You are not here to make toxic people feel safe. You are here to live, fully, loudly, freely, even if it scares them. They stood and clapped. Not politely, not out of obligation. They clapped like they felt it. And in that moment, I realized my story wasn't just about revenge. It was about reclamation, of voice, of power, of peace. Because sometimes the sweetest justice isn't watching them fall. It's watching yourself rise. Are you ready to stand up for yourself? If Tessa's story felt like your own, remember this. You are not alone. And sometimes, the most powerful revenge is simply living well without them.